She was accidentally buried beneath the desert until he heard her heartbeat. The pulse in the sand-riven thorn squinted against the relentless glare of the triple suns beating down on the vermilion wastes. Sweat traced lazy paths down his neck as he adjusted the resonance scanner, watching the display flicker with geological data. For 3 years he'd mapped these desolate stretches alone, documenting fault lines and mineral deposits for the Territorial Survey Corps. It was solitary work, but Rivan preferred it that way. Out here there were no expectations, no disappointments, only sand, stone, and silence. The scanner emitted its usual pattern of clicks and hums, then stuttered. Rivan frowned, tapping the side of the device. The reading was wrong. Instead of the typical seismic vibrations, the display showed something rhythmic, organic. He knelt in the burning sand, pressing the scanner closer to the ground. Thump, 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 thump. His breath caught. It sounded like a heartbeat. Impossible, he muttered, but his hands were already moving, sweeping aside layers of crimson sand. The signal grew stronger. 20 minutes of frantic digging revealed something that made him freeze. A smooth, translucent surface buried beneath centuries of accumulated desert. It looked like glass but felt warmer, almost alive. Rivan cleared more sand, revealing an elongated pod roughly the size of a person. Inside, blurred by the crystalline surface, was a figure. He brushed away the remaining dust and his heart hammered against his ribs. A woman, or something like a woman. Her skin was a soft purple, luminescent even in the filtered light reaching through the pod. Her features were delicate but foreign. High cheekbones, a graceful slope to her nose, lips slightly parted as if caught mid-breath. Dark hair fanned around her head like a corona. She wore fitted clothing in a style he'd never seen, adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. She wasn't moving, but the scanner insisted her heart was beating. Riven's mind raced through possibilities. An artifact? A preserved body? But the scanner didn't lie about living tissue. His fingers found a seam along the pod's edge. The moment he touched it, a hairline fracture appeared, spreading like lightning across the surface. No, no, no. He tried to steady the pod, but it was too late. With a sound like breaking ice, the crystalline shell shattered. The woman inside gasped, a desperate, drowning sound, and her eyes flew open. They were violet, deep as twilight, and utterly terrified. She tried to sit up, gasping again, her body convulsing as if remembering how to breathe. Rivan reached out instinctively. Easy, easy, you're safe. Just breathe. She recoiled from his touch, scrambling backward in the sand, her chest heaving. Words tumbled from her lips in a language he didn't recognize. Melodic but sharp with panic. Her gaze darted around the endless desert, at the alien landscape that had once been buried, at Rivan himself. He raised both hands slowly, the universal gesture of peace. I won't hurt you, he said softly, even though he knew she couldn't understand. My name is Rivan. You're safe now. Her eyes fixed on him, searching his face for threat or truth. Minutes passed in tense silence, marked only by her ragged breathing and the distant whisper of wind across the dunes. Slowly, so slowly, the panic in her expression began to fade, replaced by confusion and something that looked like profound grief. Rivan reached for his water canteen, uncapping it and offering it to her. She stared at the container, then at him. When he mimed drinking, understanding flickered across her features. She accepted it with trembling hands and drank deeply, water spilling down her chin. When she lowered the canteen, her violet eyes met his again. This time she spoke a single word in his language, heavily accented but clear. Where? Rivan gestured at the vast emptiness surrounding them. The vermilion wastes. You were buried. Deep. How long, I don't know. She looked at the broken pod, at the disturbed sand, at her own hands as if seeing them for the first time. Then she spoke again, her voice breaking. Everyone. He didn't need a translator to understand that question. The sorrow in it was universal. I don't know, Rivan admitted, but we'll figure it out. Together. She studied him for a long moment, then gave the smallest nod, as the suns began their descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold. Rivan helped her to her feet and guided her toward his camp, neither of them speaking, both carrying the weight of questions that would take time to answer. Oid. Whispers of a forgotten world. The survey camp was modest. A weathered shelter dome, a few solar panels, and equipment cases scattered across the sand. Lyra stood at the entrance, hesitant, as if Crossing the threshold meant accepting this impossible reality. Riven gestured inside, his movements gentle and unhurried. "It's not much, but it's shelter," he said, keeping his voice low and calm. She stepped inside, her violet eyes taking in everything with an intensity that made Rivan realize she was cataloging, analyzing, trying to make sense of a world that had moved on without her. She touched the fabric of the dome wall, ran her fingers across the solar lantern, picked up a datapad and turned it over in her hands. "Primitive," she murmured in her own language, then seemed to catch herself. She looked at Rivan apologetically and tried again. "Old, no, simple?" Her accent wrapped around the words like silk over stone. "Functional," Rivan offered with a slight smile. "I'm a surveyor, not a luxury traveler." Over the next few days, a routine emerged. Rivan would wake before dawn to check his equipment while Lyra watched the sunrise, her expression distant and melancholic. He'd prepare simple meals, rehydrated proteins and grain supplements, which she ate slowly, as if each bite reminded her of food she'd never taste again. Communication was a puzzle they solved piece by piece. Lyra's people were called the Eston, and she had been, an archival keeper, someone who preserved historical records and artifacts. Her name, she told him, meant "song of the evening sky" in her language. She'd been documenting ruins when the ground had opened beneath her team. "Soren," she said one evening, staring into the small heating unit that served as their campfire. "My colleague. We were together when—" She made a gesture like something falling, collapsing. Her hands trembled. "I called for him. The sand was so heavy. I couldn't breathe. And then, the pod. Emergency stasis. I thought minutes. Maybe hours. 300 years, Riven said quietly, according to the carbon dating on the sand layers. The number seemed to break something in her. She drew her knees to her chest, making herself small. Riven wanted to comfort her but didn't know how. Didn't know if his touch would be welcome or intrusive. Instead, he moved closer, sitting beside her in the sand outside the dome. "Everyone I knew is gone," Lyra whispered. "My mother, my sister, Soren. The entire library I spent my life building. 3 centuries of dust." "I'm sorry," Rivan said, the words feeling desperately inadequate. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Lyra spoke again, her voice steadier. "Tell me about you. Tell me about this world that forgot mine." So he did. He told her about the Territorial Survey Corps, about his years alone in the desert, about the cities that sprawled beyond the wastelands. He told her about his family, a father who'd wanted him to be a soldier, a mother who'd died when he was young, a brother he hadn't spoken to in years. He told her about choosing solitude because it was easier than disappointing people. Lyra listened, really listened, her violet eyes never leaving his face. "You're lonely too," she observed. The accuracy of it stung. "I suppose I am." "Then we are both ghosts," she said softly, "haunting a world that doesn't need us." "Maybe," Riven agreed. "Or maybe we're just people who haven't found where we belong yet." Something shifted in her expression. A crack in the grief, letting in the faintest light of possibility. She reached out, her purple fingers hovering near his hand before finally settling on it. Her touch was warm, solid, real. "Teach me," she said. "Teach me this new world, and I will teach you mine." The following days blurred into a strange kind of intimacy. Riven showed her his telescope, and she gasped when she saw the stars, pointing out constellations that no longer existed, explaining their mythologies in broken phrases that mixed her language with his. He taught her how to use the datapad, and she learned with stunning speed, her fingers dancing across the screen as she absorbed centuries of history in compressed files. She taught him words in Eston, Velsha for the hour when heat became unbearable, Miranos for the ache of missing someone, Thesera for the moment when strangers become friends. He practiced the pronunciations, stumbling over the vowels until she laughed, the first real laugh he'd heard from her, bright and musical. One evening, as they prepared the meal together, their hands brushed while reaching for the same container. Both froze. The contact lasted only a heartbeat, but it left Rivan's skin tingling. Lyra's cheeks darkened to a deeper purple and she quickly looked away, but not before he caught the small smile on her lips. That night, Rivan couldn't sleep. He lay in his cot, listening to Lyra's soft breathing from across the dome. She'd insisted on sleeping on the floor despite his protests, curled on a thermal blanket he'd given her. In the darkness, he heard her whisper something in Eston. A prayer, maybe, or a goodbye to ghosts. He wanted to go to her, to tell her she wasn't alone anymore. But he stayed where he was, uncertain if what he was feeling was compassion or something far more complicated. Outside, the desert wind sang through the dunes, carrying secrets only the sand remembered. Fragments of memory. The nightmares started on the 6th night. Riven woke to Lyra thrashing on her blanket, crying out in Eston, her voice raw with terror. He crossed the dome in 2 strides and knelt beside her. Lyra, wake up. You're safe. Her eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused. For a moment, she didn't recognize him. Then awareness returned, and she grabbed his arm with both hands, her grip desperate. The archive, she gasped. It's burning. The books, Rivan, the books are burning, and Soren is screaming. It's a dream, he said firmly, covering her hands with his. Just a dream. You're here. You're safe, she was shaking violently. Without thinking, Riven pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest as she fought to control her breathing. Gradually, the tremors subsided. She didn't pull away. Instead, she pressed closer, her fingers clutching his shirt. It feels so real, she whispered against his shoulder. I can smell the smoke. Hear the collapse. Your mind is processing the trauma, Rivan said gently. It's trying to make sense of what happened. But it wasn't just memories, Lyra insisted, pulling back enough to look at him. In the dim light, her violet eyes were luminous. There were things I don't remember experiencing. A great hall. Soldiers in silver armor. Someone shouting about contamination protocols. Riven's brow furrowed. Could they be suppressed memories? Something your stasis pod preserved? Maybe. She looked troubled. I need to go back. To the excavation site. There might be more chambers, more records. Something that explains what really happened. He wanted to refuse. The site was dangerous, unstable. But he saw the determination in her face and knew she'd go with or without him. Tomorrow, he agreed. We'll go tomorrow. They returned at first light, Rivan carrying scanning equipment and excavation tools. The broken stasis pod still lay where they'd left it, partially buried again by the restless wind. Lyra stood over it, her expression unreadable. I was 28, she said quietly. I had just been promoted to senior keeper. I thought I had my whole life ahead of me. She looked at Riven. What am I now? Still 28, he said. Just with a longer story. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. You always know what to say. Not always. He activated the scanner, sweeping it across the area. But I'm learning. The scanner picked up multiple signals, hollow spaces beneath the sand. They chose the strongest one and began digging. An hour later, they'd uncovered a doorway carved with intricate symbols. Lyra traced them with reverent fingers. These are prayers of preservation, she breathed. This was part of the archive complex. The door was sealed, but the mechanism had degraded over centuries. Together, they forced it open, revealing a descending passage. Riven switched on his portable light, and they entered the darkness. And the truth in the ruins. The passage descended steeply into cool darkness that smelled of ancient stone and forgotten time. Rivan's light cut through the shadows, revealing walls covered in the Eston script, flowing symbols that seemed to dance in the moving beam. Lyra's fingers traced them as they walked, her lips moving silently as she read. These are daily logs, she murmured. Mundane things. Inventory records. Shift rotations. Her voice caught. Soren's handwriting. He always made his symbols too elaborate. The tunnel opened into a chamber, and Rivan swept his light across the space. Shelves lined the walls, most collapsed. Their contents scattered across the floor, data crystals, storage devices in formats he'd never seen, and something that looked like books but made from a material that shimmered between solid and liquid. Lyra moved through the debris like a woman in a dream, picking up pieces of her past. She found a crystal and held it up to Riven's light. Inside, holographic text appeared, floating in the air. A personal log, she whispered, reading rapidly. From Director Callis. 3 days before it happened. Her eyes widened. Rivan, listen to this. The Dominion Council has issued final evacuation orders. They claim our temporal research violates the causality accords. We have 48 hours to abandon 3 centuries of work. Callis refuses. He says we'll hide the most sensitive materials and return when the political winds shift. Temporal research? Riven moved closer. What were your people studying? Time perception. Memory preservation across generations. Nothing dangerous. Her voice rose with indignation. We were historians, not weapons manufacturers. She found another crystal, then another. Each one added pieces to the puzzle. The Eston hadn't been destroyed. They'd been forcibly evacuated by the Dominion Council, a galactic authority that governed multiple worlds and species. The Council had deemed certain research too dangerous, too likely to disrupt the natural flow of time and consequence. They gave us 2 days, Lyra said, her voice hollow. 2 days to pack up 300 years of accumulated knowledge. Most people left. But some... She stopped, her hand pressed against her mouth. Some stayed behind, Rivan finished gently. We were going to hide the archives, bury them until it was safe to return. Tears streamed down her purple cheeks, catching the light. But there was a sandquake. The emergency protocols activated. The stasis pods were supposed to signal for rescue after the tremors stopped. She looked at Rivan, devastation in her eyes. No one came. They left you, Rivan said, anger stirring in his chest. They forced you out and then abandoned anyone who couldn't evacuate in time. Lyra sank to the floor amid the scattered remnants of her civilization. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Rivan knelt beside her, uncertain, then wrapped his arms around her. This time she turned into his embrace, burying her face against his neck as grief poured out of her. I'm so angry, she choked out, at Callus for being stubborn, at the Council for not checking for survivors, at myself for staying, at the universe for stealing everything from me. You have every right to be angry, Rivan said, stroking her hair. What they did was wrong. They stayed like that for a long time, her grief soaking into his shirt, his steady presence the only anchor she had in a world that had forgotten her. Gradually, her breathing steadied. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him. Thank you, she said softly, for finding me, for not leaving me alone in this. I wouldn't, Rivan said, and realized how true it was. In less than a week, this woman from another time had become essential to him. I couldn't. Something shifted in the air between them. Lyra's hand came up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with a gentleness that made his breath catch. Her violet eyes searched his, asking a question she didn't have words for. Rivan answered by closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was hesitant, exploratory, two people from different worlds learning each other's language. Her lips were soft and warm, tasting faintly of the sweet tea he'd made that morning. When they parted, both were breathing faster. Is this allowed? Lyra asked, her voice barely a whisper. In your culture, there's no one here to tell us it isn't, Rivan said, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. And I stopped caring about rules a long time ago, she smiled, a real smile that lit up her entire face. Then she kissed him again, deeper this time, her hand sliding into his hair. The abandoned archive witnessed their connection. Two lonely souls finding solace in each other amid the ruins of loss. When they finally pulled apart, both were flushed. Lyra rested her forehead against his. I didn't think I'd ever feel anything but grief again. Neither did I, Rivan admitted. I've been numb for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to care about someone. A sound from above made them both freeze, voices echoing down the tunnel. Rivan immediately switched off his light, pulling Lyra close in the darkness. The voices grew louder. Official tones. Authority. The surveyor's equipment is still active, someone said. He must be down here. With the artifact? Another voice, colder. The biosignature suggests it's alive, mobile. The council will want it contained immediately. Lyra's hand tightened on Riven's arm. In the darkness, he heard her fear, felt her understanding. She wasn't a person to them. She was an artifact, something to be studied, contained, catalogued. We need to go. Rivan breathed directly into her ear. Now. He grabbed what data crystals he could carry, stuffing them into his pack. Then he took Lyra's hand and led her deeper into the archive, away from the voices, searching for another way out. Behind them, lights began to fill the chamber they'd just left. They ran through the darkness, trusting Rivan's scanner to guide them, until they found a collapsed section of wall that opened to the desert above. They climbed out into the blinding afternoon sun, and Rivan immediately covered their tracks as best he could. They're going to come after me, Lyra said, her voice tight with panic. Then we don't let them catch us, Rivan said grimly. He looked toward the endless dunes stretching to the horizon. There are settlements out there, places even the council doesn't monitor closely. If the Eston survivors exist, that's where they'd be. You'd run, risk your career, your safety? Revan cupped her face in his hands, his answer simple and absolute. Yes. They gathered what supplies they could carry from his camp before the officials arrived, then disappeared into the Vermilion Wastes, two fugitives against the setting suns, running toward an uncertain future together. A new horizon. The deep desert was unforgiving. For 3 days, Riven and Lyra traveled across endless dunes, navigating by the stars that Lyra remembered and the coordinates Riven had marked years ago. Rumors of settlements that existed off the grid, beyond the reach of official oversight. They walked mostly at night when the temperature dropped, huddled together for warmth in the cold desert darkness. During the day, they sheltered beneath emergency thermal blankets, pressed close in whatever shade they could find. The intimacy was born of necessity at first, but it evolved into something more. Whispered conversations about dreams and fears, stolen kisses in the purple light of dawn, hands intertwined as they slept. "Tell me about your brother," Lyra said one evening as they shared their dwindling rations. Rivan was quiet for a moment. "Jaren, he's 5 years younger.
He became the soldier our father wanted me to be."
"We fought the last time we spoke. I told him he was wasting his life following orders, and he told me I was wasting mine hiding in the sand." He smiled without humor. "We were both right. Do you miss him?" "Every day," Rivan admitted. "But I didn't know how to bridge the gap between who he wanted me to be and who I am." Lyra leaned her head on his shoulder. "Maybe you'll get another chance. Time has a way of healing things we think are broken forever. I should know." On the 4th day, as the twin moons rose full and bright, they crested a dune and saw it, a valley carved between red rock formations, and nestled within it, lights. A settlement. As they drew closer, Riven's heart began to pound. The architecture was unlike anything built by his people. Domed structures with the same flowing designs he'd seen in the archive. Gardens growing in impossible spirals. And people, dozens of them, with skin in shades of purple, blue, and violet. Lyra stopped walking, her hand flying to her mouth. "It's real. They're real. Myaston." They were spotted before they reached the settlement's edge. Guards approached cautiously, weapons lowered but ready. One of them, a woman with deep indigo skin and silver hair, froze when she saw Lyra. She spoke in rapid Eston, her voice sharp with disbelief. Lyra responded, her voice shaking. The conversation went back and forth, growing more animated. Finally, the guard lowered her weapon completely and rushed forward, embracing Lyra fiercely. "She says I'm a miracle," Lyra translated for Rivan, tears streaming down her face. "They thought everyone who stayed behind had died. She says," her voice broke. "She says her grandmother knew Soren, that he survived. He lived another 40 years here, always hoping someone else would be found." The settlement welcomed them with cautious warmth. Riven was the first human many of them had seen, but Lyra's presence, a living connection to their abandoned homeworld, granted him acceptance. They were given quarters, food, medical attention. Lyra was reunited with fragments of her culture that had survived, songs, stories, even a few elderly residents who had been children during the evacuation. But that night, lying together in a comfortable bed for the first time in days, Lyra was quiet. "What's wrong?" Riven asked, stroking her hair. "I found them," she said softly. "Myaston, what I've been searching for." "But Riven," she turned to face him, her violet eyes glistening. "I don't belong here either. They're kind, but I'm a relic to them. A curiosity from a world they've spent 300 years trying to forget." "Then where do you belong?" She pressed her palm against his chest, over his heart. "Here, with you. You're the only thing in this entire timeline that feels real to me." Rivan kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Then stay with me. Not here, not in my old camp. Somewhere new. We'll find a place that's ours." "The officials are still looking for me," she reminded him. "Let them look. The desert is vast, and I know every hidden corner of it." He smiled. "And now I have someone worth hiding for." Over the following weeks, they made plans. The Eston settlement helped them establish a small outpost near an oasis 2 days' journey away. Far enough for safety, close enough for community. They built a home together from desert stone and salvaged materials, decorated with artifacts from both their cultures. Lyra established a modest archive, preserving the data crystals they'd rescued and recording oral histories from the settlement elders. Riven continued his survey work, but now he came home each evening to shared meals, to laughter, to a bed warmed by someone who chose him as much as he'd chosen her. One evening, 6 months after finding her, Riven watched Lyra working in their garden, a hybrid of human and Estin plants growing in the red soil. The setting suns painted her purple skin in shades of copper and gold. She looked up, caught him staring, and smiled. "What are you thinking?" she called out. "That I spent 3 years alone in the desert thinking I preferred solitude," he said, walking over to her. "And then I heard a heartbeat beneath the sand and everything changed." Lyra stood, brushing dirt from her hands, and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Fate buried me for 300 years just to bring me to you. I'd say that makes us pretty important to the universe." "Or pretty stubborn," Riven countered, grinning. "Both," she agreed, and kissed him as the desert wind sang around them. No longer a song of loneliness, but of home, of choice, of two people who had been lost until they found each other. In the distance, the settlement lights flickered to life like stars brought down to earth. Somewhere beyond the dunes, officials might still be searching. But here, in this small corner of the Vermilion Wastes, Riven and Lyra had built something the desert couldn't bury, and time couldn't steal. A love that existed outside of fate's original plan, thriving in the space between what was lost and what could be found. The desert had kept her secret for 3 centuries. Now it would keep theirs for as long as they needed, offering its endless horizons as a promise that second chances could bloom even in the most unlikely soil, and that sometimes the most profound discoveries weren't ruins of the past but possibilities of the future. Together they walked back into their home as the night settled around them, 2 souls who had crossed time and loneliness to find where they truly belonged. Not in the world that forgot them, but in the life they built together, one moment at a time.